we have this natural arc. And like, if you look at, a big group of adults as they move through life, we'll see that we gradually lose muscle mass and muscle strength. And that makes it look like this lovely kind of smooth curve that kind of happens, and it's very measured and very controlled. And we sort of say, oh, well, look, it's so gradual, like, it's kind of almost like it's not happening at all. But what we know that actually, if we look at any one individual and their own individual arc, is that we'll often see that, as you pointed out there, those disuse events where I have that illness or I have that injury, that suddenly results in a big phase change where actually, I may be, as you said, hospitalized, maybe I'm bedridden for a period of time, or maybe I fracture my hip and, I can't weight bear or whatever it might be. And as a result of that, I lose muscle mass and I lose muscle strength and I lose function at maybe an accelerated rate. And that's more what represents the reality of what happens. And we all know people who maybe have had an illness or have had injury, and, we see a change in them, and they might find it hard to bounce back. And I suppose the thing we're so passionate about is trying to, highlight that if we actually, the fitter and stronger we are before we ever run into those events, means we don't drop as low and we have the ability to bounce back quicker. I think there's a nice graph and slide we can bring up there too, that I know we've both alluded to in the past, where, you have these disuse events, and then you have the difference of someone who doesn't engage in consistent exercise, tends to maintain at that lower level. So they've had this disuse event, they drop, and then, maybe they drift a little bit more because I suppose they've lost muscle mass, they've lost strength, they can't do as much, and all of that comes along with that, the trauma that comes along with that. But if they're aerobically trained, they walk or they do their bike, or they're involved in some back to the golf, whatever it might be, you see those people can bounce back. And the people who bounce back even more are those who also engage in strength training, which means they rebuild their muscle strength, they rebuild muscle mass, as well as training their cardiovascular system, which is their heart and their lungs. And we see that big bounce back ability in those people in comparison to those who don't do it.
And I suppose the classic thing that I hear from patients coming in for their first session is post-cardiac event. And what happened is whether they had a bypass or they'd stents or they had a heart attack or they'd some sort of cardiac event. This could be 2 years ago. And they say, geez, I'm doing great now. I'm fully cleared by my cardiologist. I did my cardiac rehab. I'm back doing my 5K walks. But what I've really noticed, Mike, is I never got my legs back. Okay, and they're basically describing what we say there. They've gotten fit again. They're able to walk. They're able to cycle. They're aerobically fit, but they've never got back their strength. And the reality is, you won't get your strength back unless you strength train. We don't build muscle mass by walking, even if it is hiking up and down the mountain, even if it is a big long cycle. They're using our slow twitch muscle fibers. They're using our aerobic or oxidative system, and they're not challenging the strength and the muscle mass. And and one isn't better than the other. Again, we always educate people this. I don't want to be good at English and bad at maths, or vice versa. I say you want to be good at both. You don't want to be fit and not strong, or
what if you're bad at both?
Fit. Yeah, if you're bad at both, you what are you waiting for? You need to get started. So, the important thing is that I'm training my fitness. I'm doing my walking, my running, cycling, swimming, tennis, yoga, golf, whatever you enjoy, 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week. The more, the better for most people. But I'm resistance training at least twice a week. I'm resistance training using major muscle groups, progressing it, finding the right starting point and progressing it over time.
Yeah, Mike, and look, tying that into the master's program, I suppose one of the key things there is what are people generally able to do by themselves without much help? Well, most of the time people can get involved in some aerobic exercise. I mean, leave the house, go for a walk, or, it's that bit more accessible. There's less technique involved in getting on a bike, or maybe going down to your swimming pool or whatever it might be, or playing golf. But where people tend to need that bit more help and support is around the resistance training piece. And there's coaching needed for that. There's knowing what to do and how to do it, how to progress it. What if I have an illness or an injury? What about my symptoms? How do I exercise while I have symptoms? What symptoms are safe? What aren't? How do I know when I should push it on? How do I know when I should pull it back? And I think that's really a really crucial, or the crux of a lot of what we do in the master's program. It's the cornerstone, is helping people learn how to exercise, particularly regarding strength training. And while we do engage in cardiovascular training and we coach people through that too, I think the resistance training bit is often the bit that our skill set is most well suited to as both physiotherapists and strength and conditioning coaches, which we are. That allows us to really help people find, where do I start? How do I progress? and to get the benefits you've described there, to get their legs back, you know, or get their strength back. They may be fit, they may be doing lots of good things, but where does strength come from? It comes from doing strength training and resistance training.